Welcome back to Paul and Benny. I'm Paul, and today I'm making this pie crust right here. It's my favorite pie crust because it comes out great consistently. I used to be so apprehensive about making pie pastry because I always heard if you add too much water, it's not going to come out right. If you add too little water, it's going to be messed up. If your butter's not cold enough, if you knead it too much, like there were so many variables that could cause it to not come out great. And I've had some not come out great. But this crust today, it takes away all that apprehension, all that nervousness about making your own pie crust. It comes out great every time I've made it. So I'm using it today for this homemade apple galette because apples are in season and it's delicious. But you can use it for any type of pie. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm starting off with about 2.5 cups of flour here, just all-purpose flour. I know a lot of pastry recipes want you to weigh out your ingredients, but this is pie crust here. It's not like a cake or souffle that depends on a certain chemical reaction in order for it to come out right. It's crust. You can eyeball it once you get good at it. But I'm adding my salt here. I'm adding some sugar. Of course, if you're using this crust for, a pot pie or something like that, you would add no sugar to it. And don't worry, the full recipe with the exact measurements are in the description box below this video. And I'm stirring the salt and sugar in really well so that when the liquid hits it, there's no clumps of sugar or salt. Now we're going to ensure we have a tender, flaky crust by adding about a tablespoon of olive oil to our flour mixture. You don't want too much water in your dough, right? Because water is going to help the flour develop gluten. But if we stir in this olive oil and coat the flour with that first, it's going to protect the flour from absorbing too much liquid into it. And you could use any type of oil you want. I just prefer to use this. Now I'm going to cut in my butter into the flour. My butter's been in the refrigerator all day long. You could absolutely grate this on a grater. You could chop it on a cutting board. The pie making experts are losing their minds right now because like the heat from your hands going to melt the butter. You're going to have a disastrous crust. I promise I'm not going to. The butter's cold. I'm just chopping it into chunks. And the butter's not going to melt from the heat from my hands. You can see that I've chopped up 2 sticks there. It's completely firm still. And I'm just going to toss it here now with a blending fork. You could use your hands. Don't tell anyone I told you that. You could use a pastry blender. You could use 2 knives. You could use whatever you want to use. You could even use a potato masher here. But I find this is really convenient. And I'm just going to toss it so every piece of butter is coated in flour. Now I'm just pressing it against the bowl and I'm breaking up the chunks of flour into smaller pieces and moving them around so that they collect the flour from the bottom of the bowl. So just smash them into the bowl, move it around. It's going to take a couple minutes. It's kind of fun. It's like you're breaking up the chunks until they look like, I don't know, I'd say like Cheetos maybe. And from there, I'm just going to keep going. They say it should look like small peas, but I've never had peas that look like that before. So just break them up until they're tiny little pieces, just a whole bowl full of pieces, and there's not a lot of extra flour laying around in the bowl. Unfortunately, I tend to make a mess when I'm in the kitchen, so let me clean this up before we move on. You'll see I have a cup of ice water that's been sitting here while I've been preparing my flour and butter mixture. And I'm just going to add about a tablespoon of lemon juice to it, stir it in well. And then we're going to add about 3 tablespoons of water to our flour and butter mixture. I'm gently going to begin bringing it together. You could also use vinegar if you didn't have a lemon, but the acid is going to prevent the flour from developing gluten. So you're not going to get a tough, chewy crust. Even if you add a little bit too much water, the oil is going to keep it from absorbing too much water, and then the acid's going to keep any liquid that does come in contact with the flour from developing a tough gluten strand. So here I'm adding a little bit more water because I don't have enough. I just want to make sure that my dough will pull away from the sides of the bowl and all the flour off the bottom of the bowl will get mixed in. And then we just keep bringing it together until we have a dough that holds together. I'm going to roll my dough out onto the silicone mat, but you don't have to use one. You could just use a floured countertop. You could use a cutting board, whatever you're most comfortable with. And this is enough dough for 1 pie that has a top and a bottom on it, like a cherry or apple pie, or if they're open lid pies, like a pumpkin pie, this is enough for 2 recipes. I'm going to cut mine into 8 pieces because these apple galettes I'm making are individual size servings. I like miniature desserts. I like everyone to get their own piece when possible. And we only need one today. I'm going to save the rest of this dough for next week when I'm baking for Thanksgiving. So I'm going to make a galette for demonstration purposes only today, or maybe because we also want a treat. If you look closely, you'll see that there's still hunks of butter in our crust. You don't want big old chunks, but there should be some flecks and spots in there. So you know that the heat from my hands did not destroy this crust or this dough. And I just filled it with these thinly sliced apples that have been soaking in some sugar. The sugar will draw out some of the juice. They'll get soft and I have to bake so long. And I tossed some little cinnamon as well. It's really light and delicious. But you see here, I'm actually baking my pie in the air fryer basket. There was no need to heat up the oven for a single dessert today, and air fried pies work out really well. You can also use this pie dough for fried pies. Like you want to make individual size hand pies, you can absolutely fry them in a skillet in a little bit of oil as well. I brush my crust with a little bit of buttermilk because it makes it beautiful. You don't have to. You could use an egg wash. You could use milk. You could use nothing at all. Nothing at all, and it would still come out absolutely delicious. But I love the sheen that the buttermilk gives it. And then I have some thick, chunky sanding sugar crystals. I'm not a huge fan of biting into sugar crystals, but Benny loves them, and they do make the top of the dessert really beautiful when it comes out of the oven. So I'm just going to sprinkle a good amount of sugar on here. This is what it looked like when it came out of the air fryer. It was super delicious and flaky. We had to wait for it to cool, but the crust is so tender. Even after half of this galette sat in the refrigerator and ate it the next day, it was super delicious. So I hope you'll try this recipe and see that you can make your own delicious pie crust at home with no problem at all. Hope you make extra batches and freeze it so you can pull it out and use it conveniently during the holidays. And as always, we're grateful for easy, delicious recipes that we can share with our friends and family, and we're always grateful for you watching.